Hey everyone, Adam here, So Is Your Podcast. I have another interview for you today. I got to talk to Ash Patino, who made a documentary called PTSD, The Walking Wounded. This is a little bit of a change of gears for us at So Wizard. Normally we do pop culture, we like to keep it fun, keep it light, watch the newest releases, this and that, but I think this is a really important subject. It's a well-made documentary, so it does fall into the well-made movie category. But it's a very important subject and something that doesn't get enough attention. There's not that many people who put their lives on the line to serve our country, and they just need to be taken care of better. I'm not going to get into a whole political thing. I'm not going to get into a whole sides versus sides. I don't see this as any of that. This is just helping people who need it. I could go on and elaborate, but Ash is going to do a much better job than I ever could explaining it, and you should definitely check out the movie. So here's the interview. Hey everyone, Adam here, So Wizard Podcast. I'm sitting down with Ash Patino. Hopefully I said that right. I always forget to ask before. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
that's correct.
How you doing, Ash?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. And you have a new documentary coming out, PTSD, The Walking Wounded.
Yes, yeah, it is about PTSD, obviously. And then in the context of our returning vets, even, vets who are older, so it's not just current. Obviously, this is a problem we've had for a long time called shell shock and other things. And so this film is about our veterans, the impact of PTSD, and what maybe we could be doing better.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Yeah. I think because it's such a foreign concept to people who don't experience PTSD, and it actually, I think PTSD extends far beyond our military. Obviously, the film itself is in regards to the military, but I think anyone who's experienced trauma, I think even now in our day and age, with some of the stuff that's been happening, I think that this film is more relevant than ever for anyone to watch. But I think especially if you do have a returning vet or a vet that has been home for a while and you're seeing symptoms of PTSD, I hope this film can at least open up a conversation, or maybe even, you could show a family or friend that you were concerned about, or if you're concerned you might have PTSD, I think it's a good film to watch because I think we talk to people who have experienced it and we go through their stories. And I believe that really kind of puts into perspective what PTSD is and what we might be able to do to help people rather than push them away because we're afraid of some of the symptoms that PTSD causes.
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many questions, but I'm trying not to jump the gun. Where did the concept, why did you decide to tackle this subject?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I didn't know anything about PTSD. Obviously, I heard about it and I felt sympathy for people who were experiencing it. So from that, I felt like I got it, like I believed it was real and that people were struggling with it. I just didn't know anything about it. So I had been kind of inadvertently ended up working with this group that was helping veterans who were in the local hospitals, usually with mental or addiction issues. And they were going and getting them and bringing them to play football. It was so random. And then we had a bunch of the ex-Giants football players start coming out and helping, teaching them and showing them how to play and catch and do all that stuff. And then we had other veterans coming out who had injuries, meaning, they were in wheelchairs or maybe didn't have the arms to throw a football. And then the Play for Your Freedom was the group that I had been kind of hanging out with there. They had started finding other things for them to even be included with, giving them a job during the days we were doing this. Then they brought in other groups like yoga, art, other things that everyone could participate in. But I was just watching this remarkable transformation with the military vets. They would come in and kind of be gruff and, a wall kind of around them. And then pretty soon they were, playing football and having fun and hanging out. And then the next week would come along and they would bring another vet with them who had been isolating and hiding out. And it just kept compounding. Like more people were coming, more people were excited, more people wanted to be involved. And I was just kind of listening to some of the vet stories and I was a little bit heartbroken because a lot of them came home to their lives not being what they were when they left. And I'm not blaming anyone. Obviously, marriages change, people change. So it's not that. It's just they would be married when they left, and then their wife wouldn't be there when they got back, or their husband wouldn't be there when they got back. They weren't able to secure jobs readily. And sometimes they were looked down upon for being in the military, which I was surprised, because I've always looked up to people in the military. So I was surprised that that was been a thing. I didn't even realize that that was an experience that our vets might have been having, that people were negative towards them. So once I started to see their change and then their desire to help other vets, I was just really blown away by how that worked. And I mean, really, you know, they say that 20% of returning vets experience PTSD, and we have 22 veterans killing themselves every single day. And I think that that shows that there's a unique problem with that specific demographic, returning vets. And I think that we need to recognize that, because they are doing so much for us as a community also. In general, I feel like we really should be paying attention to that, so that we don't lose more vets. And it seems really some of the things I saw these guys doing were really simple. They weren't like complicated. They weren't handing them drugs. It wasn't like this really difficult process. It was really about forming a community for these vets and giving them things to look forward to and helping them get to the other side of whatever they were dealing with. And I think that that was a really unique way I saw someone try to help, instead of just being like, oh, here's some drugs, or, you know, go meditate and you'll be fine. Instead, it was like, hey, let's come together and let's stay in communication with each other, so that we make sure we don't lose another one of us.
Yeah, that's one thing that I really liked about, you mentioned the Play for Freedom, where because my understanding is the guy in charge of it wasn't even in the military. He just took this on, which I thought was really cool. And it wasn't about like, hey, let's all come and share our stories and, you know, like have a huddle and cry or whatever. And if that's what you wanted, if that's what you need, then that's great. But I just like, he's like, just come hang out, just come and be people. And I think that's like a really good first step.
Well, yeah, and one of the pieces that didn't make it into the film, David Leinhardt is the gentleman who runs Play for Your Freedom, and he was talking about how they had gone into an acute mental health unit, and one of the vets there was like, "Thank you for coming in," and David was like, "Oh, of course I'll come in," and the vet was like, "People are scared of us. Everybody's scared of us," and I that kind of broke my heart, because PTSD, the symptoms do sometimes come off as an anger or you know, frustration, and I could see to someone who doesn't experience PTSD that would be scary. And instead of trying to figure out what's wrong with the person, you say, no, like, you're not appropriate, get away from me. And I think is what we started to discover pretty fast is when they were embraced and included in the community and talked to, even if it wasn't about their experiences per se, but just their day-to-day lives, it started to break that up, and they started to feel included again. And so it was really kind of this amazing transformation I was watching with people. And the film really is, I learned what PTSD was in a major way. And I wanted to show people what PTSD is, so that they could understand it the way I finally got it. And now I very much get it. And so I think that that's what the film does, is it doesn't force you into any direction. It's not saying you have to do this. Is what it's saying is, hey, look at this. Look how this comes about. Look how very kind of simple it is to understand once you see it in the way we've showcased it. So I was really trying to teach people what I had learned.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And with everything you had learned, I'm trying to phrase it because I don't want people to think I'm taking a side or coming down on any, you know, political, like I'm not doing anything affiliate, just thinking about the vets. But why has this been an issue for so long with, it seems like no progress on it?
Yeah, I think it's not, I think you made a good point even by saying I'm not taking a side here, because even in the film, we're not like blaming the government or blaming the military element, because you hear the vets talk about, you know, they're coming home, and yes, they do a psychological test, but of course you want to go home. So do you always answer those questions honestly? Probably not. You're of course like, I'm fine. And PTSD, which is odd about it, is it's not like a vet comes home and the next day they're experiencing PTSD. It can happen quickly, but for a lot of these vets, it happens 2 years, 5 years, 20 years down the road, the symptoms start appearing. So even if you might feel fine, you might be like, oh, I'm so strong. And I had the world at my fingertips, and you might feel good. And then 2 years later, all of a sudden you start to experience the symptoms. So I don't think anyone's to blame per se. Is what I do think is maybe because we know, of course, vets are going to want to come home, maybe we need to think of a process after they get home to kind of ensure that they are in a good place and make sure that they understand when they are leaving what the signs of PTSD is. And if they start to experience those, what they can do at that moment to get help or become part of a group, get counseling, what helps PTSD. And I feel like if they knew more about that maybe they could do something also about it sooner, or maybe even training their friends and families to look out for symptoms so that they can approach the vet if they are struggling and maybe mention, hey, look, I'm really seeing some signs that aren't who you normally are. Let's talk about this. And then getting rid of the stigma behind it. I feel like, and I do think the world's getting better, but I think there's always this stigma against mental health. Like you have to be mentally strong and mentally healthy. But the experience these guys and girls go through is so intense, and there's no break from it. There's no like cathartic moment when you're overseas fighting a battle. There's no like moment where you can be like, oh, I'm going to get away and not think about this for a minute. Like your life is always at risk. You always have to be on guard. You don't get a break. And sometimes that can go for like 9 months, a year, 2 years. So imagine that kind of elongated stress on somebody. And then we expect them to come home and just go back to normal life, and then what does that look like to them? Often they don't return to jobs, or they can't get a good job. I mean, these guys and girls were getting paychecks, twice a month, every the 15th and the end of the month. And now all of a sudden that's not there. So I think there just needs to be maybe some sensitivity to that, and maybe us looking at ways that we can just be supportive and try to help, or, find ways that these guys can get back on their feet and not be pulled into some of these situations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems like maybe that's why it's taken so long for like real results to come, is that it's such a big issue.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, PTSD is really confusing. It's not always obvious, and because it takes years to come about, sometimes I'm sure people don't understand what it is at first. So I think it's like trying to put a name with something and then deciding what you can do with it. So I do think there are, a lot of things people can do. Plus, and again, I'm not trying to point out a drug company or anything, but a lot of the guys talk about being handed handfuls of opioids. They're giving prescriptions for opioids. And we know that PTSD dances in the addiction world quite strongly. And I'm pretty sure it's probably people trying to relieve the PTSD symptoms through alcohol and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that's for everybody. I do think there is a decent amount of that population, though, that does co-occur with. And so I think that's very dangerous, handing somebody opioids who might have having mental issues that will fix for a little bit. And then, of course, it turns bad, and then you become addicted, and then that whole cycle starts. But I do think that we should be cognizant of that. I'm not saying painkillers, some people obviously need them, and I'm not saying that, but maybe we should be monitoring that very closely, figuring out plans to get them off and weaning them off at a certain point, and looking at other things that could substitute for that. If it's natural substances or working out or doing yoga or whatever might help with their injuries, I think that we should really be looking at that.
Yeah, especially like in the documentary, one of the people you interviewed said that he was handed 250 pills, like right there. It's like, why not like 7? Like, how about a week supply and come back? Like, this is crazy. So that's how you end up taking 20 a day, because you have them.
No, that's exactly what our concern was. It wasn't opioids. I do believe that probably is extremely helpful for some people in pain. I don't know, I haven't experienced that, but I could imagine. So
yeah.
I don't want to take that away from somebody, but at the same time, if you're going to give it to somebody who's already in a delicate place as far as potentially becoming addicted, maybe being really sensitive to that, and giving 7 at a time, and making people have to come back, recheck in, making sure it's still what they need, and that they're taking the prescription properly, just so that we don't end up with somebody who's ends up getting addicted, becoming suicidal, and not feeling hope there.
For sure, because they're pretty much instantly addicting from what I know, the little bit that I know.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've heard. So I've only ever had
Yeah.
to take like two my whole life from surgery. So I haven't had too much experience with them, but it sounds like people who do get addicted, it is often because they get a bunch and then, they take two instead of one and then three instead of one and they keep going until it gets to be a huge problem. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, so I just think that's one of the things we should probably be taking into consideration.
Yeah, it's weird because sitting here, it seems like those surface level changes would change so much, not solving it, but it would change so much.
Yeah, and I think that's what the documentary is showing is that some real little changes, and being cognizant of returning vets and talking to them. You don't have to have them go. Well, if they want to, obviously that's a great thing. But if you don't have to talk to them about all their past experiences, but talk to them. How are you doing now? If they're struggling finding work or maintaining friendships, why is that happening, and having open conversations and then checking in on them. If you do see someone having symptoms of PTSD, maybe just calling them extra. So if you talk to them once a month, maybe instead call once a week until you feel like they're on good footing. Because I think part of that is they feel very isolated and alone, and plus PTSD, they're also pushing people away.
Hmm.
So it's this weird dichotomy, where you don't. It's like trying to hug a porcupine. You get the quills in you and you don't want to do it anymore. But instead, maybe just keep a distance, talk to them, warm up, see if you can get them to come around, include them in the community you're in, or this film. That's a really great way to start conversations. Is I know with myself on other people's films, I've watched them from time, and then all of a sudden a light bulb goes off in my head where I'm like, oh my goodness, that's what was happening there, or that's what I was feeling at that same time. So I feel connected. So this could be a really good way to open up a conversation. If you do have someone you think is experiencing PTSD, watching it with them or having them watch it and then just talking to them about the film, that's a safe way because you're not telling them they have PTSD. Instead, maybe you set a light bulb off with them where they hear from other vets and think, oh, I feel that way, or I'm having those problems. What are they doing? What can I do?
Yeah, and we kind of touched on it a couple times, but I really liked the balanced approach it took, where it's you're not blaming the military because these guys are proud, or guys and girls are proud to have served. They're proud of their family members, and they should be. So I liked that it wasn't, the military's bad, they're not taking care of their people, or the government's letting them down. It's just there's a big problem here, and maybe everybody's a little bit to blame, but let's not worry about the blame game. Let's fix the people. So for
Right.
people who listening to this who are, because I know with documentaries sometimes I get a little bit like, oh, am I going to be preached to for the next 2 hours, or am I going to learn something? So this is a learn something.
Yeah, well, no, that was really nice because we're working with Gravitas, which is a big documentary distributor, and they were like, we loved the film because it wasn't shoving this down somebody's throat or pointing
Yeah.
fingers. It was much more like we have people in pain, and I think there's something we can do about it, and let's hear from them. And so I think it takes you on a journey because you get to hear their stories, kind of what got them into the military, even from like why they originally got into the military, some of them from a very young age. So you hear these like amazing stories also. And you then, for me, I don't know if I understood how the military worked that well. So I was like shocked when I'd hear these guys get out of high school and they would go right into the military. And that's all they had dreamt about their whole lives.
Hmm.
So you have people, these guys are and girls are extremely passionate about being in the military. So I think that comes through. I think then you hear the stories of their struggles that they went through. And then, it's really when they came home. And I think it's that one thing I noticed is that it's like, they're like, go, 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 go. And then all of a sudden they come home and it's like, oh, free time, so much free time to think about and do whatever. And I think that yeah, for me, that gets me into trouble. So I can't imagine if I'd gone through a traumatic experience and then all of a sudden was just dropped off in my living room. I think I would just go bananas. So I think, people have to kind of put yourself in their shoes for a minute and think about what that would be like to all of a sudden have your life go a 180 and you're expected to change everything and be okay. And
Yeah, figure it out.
yeah, exactly. And figure it out on your own a lot of times. So I
Yeah,
think that's what we're just trying to point out is that might not be the best thing to be doing.
for sure. Especially because PTSD and depression like go hand in hand. So I mean, even if you've just had kind of a lousy day, the last thing you want to do is sit in a dark room by yourself and think about it because you're only going to spiral. So multiply that by a million, and
Well, yeah, and I think that's interesting because, well, as a 42-year-old, I still have little tantrums sometimes by myself at my home, obviously, because like the
Mhm.
computer won't work or something. But that's I obviously lived a pretty privileged life, so that's just me having a little tantrum. I can't imagine being in their shoes and that clicks in immediately, and then they have all this trauma pushing on it. So you react much faster and much more maybe dramatic than you might see somebody who doesn't deal with trauma and has had a kind of nice life. You don't see that reaction. So I think it's giving that space and not engaging it, and instead maybe trying to calm the situation and then trying to figure out what's happening rather than engaging it and making it even worse. Recognizing the person is angry about a lot of stuff that isn't happening now but is in there still. And so how do we get past that and heal the person in a better way?
Absolutely, yeah, and I've been reading a lot on like stresses and like physical traumas, like hitting your head, because a few guys in the documentary mentioned they were in their they were in a caravan and it got blown up and they're unconscious, and that head trauma messes with your hormone balance, which can send you into rage, and like it's just this whole. It's not so simple as like, oh, you're stressed out or you're depressed. It's crazy how deep it goes.
Yeah, that's what's wild is one of the vets that was in the film, actually was sitting on his bed with a gun to his head and had decided that he was going to end his life. And it was because someone didn't pick up the phone. And the person who didn't pick up the phone is, of course, one of his best friends. He doesn't blame, obviously, him at all. But it was just crazy that it was that catalyst that he had
Yeah.
been pushed in his own mind, pushed and pushed and pushed. And then just the act of somebody not answering the phone got him. He was like, nobody cares.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really interesting because most of us, we're upset about something and we call someone and they don't answer. We, just continue to stew for a few minutes and then turn on a song we like and go on with our day. So I think
Right.
that shows like how extreme we're talking is that they can be very small catalysts, but I think it's when you add them up, it's like one after another after another. And for them, they're not dealing with it. And so then it becomes incredibly explosive. And for someone who's not dealing with that, we kind of blow it off or we laugh about it or whatever and go on with our day. And so I think it's like trying to recognize that and figuring out what we can do to kind of support.
Yeah, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like it's already piled up. It wasn't the phone call. That was just the latest thing.
Oh, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
person even, it wasn't, they did call back eventually. So it wasn't even somebody who was like not trying to talk to him or mad at
Yes.
him.
Oh, I went for a run. I did my phone on me. Like
No,
anything.
exactly. Yeah. So it's just it's crazy when you start to see those. And when I love this film for the fact that like you hear the stories and they're all very similar. And
Hmm.
that's when I think you really see what PTSD is because the ribbon it goes through all of them and you can kind of see the same things pop up and the same actions taken. And so I think when you start to see that, that really helps make it make more sense or make you get it when if you haven't experienced it, it might be really hard to understand. But when you can see so many people having very shared similar experiences, I think that's when you're like, okay, this is very real. And these people are kind of trapped inside and not able to get all the stuff that they've seen or the trauma they've experienced out, and they need to somehow, and we need to figure out how to make that, basically build that bridge for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about The Walking Wounded as a documentary, do you have a background in documentary film?
Okay, so I did just probably 3 years ago start in documentary. I'd been working in narrative before and just was never able to get a strong foothold. And then when I started documentary, which is bizarre because the journalist side of me came out, and I have not been trained in journalism traditionally, but if you watch a lot of my other work, it's investigating what we're looking into and trying to find answers and trying to showcase those in a fair and reasonable way. Like if we have the evidence, we show it and we let you make up your own mind. We're not a type of company that's like trying to make you see something our way. Like instead we're like, hey, look at this, here's people who were there, you listen to them and then you can decide. And
Hmm.
so that journalist side came out, and in our day and age, journalists sometimes, not all, some are amazing, so but we also are a lot of times given misinformation or information that has no evidentiary backing. And so I really, when I started down the documentary path, I all of a sudden found out I had a knack for wanting to find the truth and wanting to get as much evidence to support whatever the truth was, whether it was what I agreed with or didn't. I wanted to find out for myself. So that's really when I started doing that. My first documentary was about a 12-year-old girl who committed suicide after being bullied at school. And it was just talking to all the people who were involved and there. And it was that documentary just changed my life. I was shocked at how many people wrote in and were like, wow, this changed my life. Or my daughter was being bullied. I was able to show her this documentary and open up a line of conversation. And when I saw that I could impact people in a positive way by making these films is when I really got excited about it, because it just opened up like the little advocate in me to not only make films and try to make a living at it, but also to change hearts and minds. And so through that, I was really excited I felt like I found my place in the world also. And so documentaries are probably always want to do documentaries moving forward, because I think it gives people a voice who maybe didn't have a voice before.
That's a really good way to look at it, and I think you're absolutely right. And maybe not being classically trained in journalism is working to your benefit at this point, because look at the state of journalism. So,
well, I do think in some ways it has, because in some of the work I've done, other journalists were like, "I can't believe you shared that," and I was like, "Well, I just shared the truth. I'm not going to hide that. If I see it and it's true, or there's evidence to back it up, I'm going to say that. But I don't ever want my opinions to get involved in the projects I'm doing, because I want people to make up their minds for themselves, because that's what I'm doing while I investigate or try to figure these things out for myself. So I think it's like a different way to tell a story, rather than and obviously, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Michael Moore films, but they feel like very one-sided, very much you have to believe this. And I wanted to back away from that a little bit and allow people to make up their own minds.
I like that approach much better. I don't want to be told what to think. I want to be presented with, here's everything that I learned about PTSD in the last X amount of months or years. Go.
Yeah, no, and that's how I like to be talked to. I listen to podcasts that think very differently than I do, but are very middle of the road, and I feel like are giving information correctly. Mm-hmm. And I love that, because they're just presenting it in a way that's like, here's what we're finding from studies, here's what is happening here, and like that's what I gravitate towards. So I really wanted to present something that was in that same line of just, sure, you can sometimes tell how people feel, but they're still sharing the information fairly. And I think that's what we need more of in this world. So I really want to make films that kind of allow that.
Especially with the documentary, like The Walking Wounded that we're talking about, you have firsthand accounts of people. So you don't need to come and put your own spin on it. They're literally there telling you everything.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's doing that and then honoring how they said it in the context they said it in, and being honorable that way, because you can always
that's true.
Take liberties, and I'm really careful if it feels like not what they said anymore. I'm like, no, we have to go back, put the line all back together how it was, and make sure it's what they meant. So, because obviously in filmmaking you have to cut out some parts because people might not watch it otherwise. So it's really honoring what the person was saying and the context and what they meant it in, and making sure that's portrayed on the film the way that they were wanting it to be. So I think that's been an important aspect of this.
Yeah, that is a good point too, is you have to be really careful in the edit to, like, you have to watch your runtime, but you can't change the meaning of a sentence even accidentally.
Yeah, and that's so important, because I've seen so many times where I see something in the news and I'm like, oh my goodness, that person said that, that's awful. And then I see the whole clip and I'm like, how could they even have done that? Like, that is so inappropriate to me. And I can only imagine it would be so frustrating to public figures. Ooh, Django.
Yeah, sorry.
And so I think that, I think it's important as a filmmaker to keep things in context. And I really would implore other journalists and filmmakers to make sure that they're honoring that as well.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of the people you interviewed, I really liked the mix that you had, because there was like 4, I think, main interview subjects, and they were kind of from all different walks, but with obviously the common thread through them. And I thought that was a really one balanced way to do it, but it was also kind of refreshing where someone's story might have been, I mean, all the stories were sad, but the one girl who was speaking on behalf of her brother, she was a really upbeat, positive person for most of it. So it's not really a documentary you can put a lot of levity into, but she kind of helped it from feeling, maybe overwhelming is too strong a word given what we're talking about, but I think you get my meaning.
Yeah, no, she was amazing. She had lost her brother to PTSD. And I think that when you, what was so amazing about her story is she's turned around and is now helping vets. That's what I thought was so amazing. So I think even though the film is heavy, it is heavy content, but I think there are parts, especially as you get to the end, that show a lot of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really bookended by like these incredible stories of why people got into the military, which is a little bit lighthearted. And then the end where there's hope on what we can do. In the middle is kind of the beefier part where they kind of talk about how they got there and then what they experienced once they got home. And so, but then in the end, I think it's really what everybody in the film had done to help other vets. Almost everybody had either started something or was starting a program or doing something to kind of help other vets. And she had done such a great job of that herself. And so I think it was really amazing to show her in the film. And the fact that she has maintained such a positive outlook after what she had experienced with her family, I think was just an incredible, an incredible thing to show how these are everyday people.
Yeah.
For me and you, like they're just trying to live their lives and they care about our country. And I think that they're trying to navigate these really difficult situations. And I think what she has done is incredible. And the fact that she has so much strength and at such a young age to continue on and then to help fight for others, I think is just a tremendous insight into who some of these people were.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she was kind of, I kind of saw her as the voice of, well, maybe not the audience, but maybe me, because I don't have military experience or anything. I do have really close friends on a family member. So she was kind of my perspective, but anyone watching this would probably fall in line with, now that I think you had 5 main interview subjects, but someone would fall in line with any of the personalities. And that was probably at least partly calculated on your part, but it was also interesting just to give all the perspectives.
Yeah, we were trying to show a diverse group, meaning like not everyone came from the same military group, or not everyone, had experienced the same level of PTSD. We tried to show the different levels, the impacts on family, and I think we were able to do that really well. And I think to team up with a group like Play for Your Freedom, which was the group we had gotten all of our subjects for our film from, was an incredible thing to do because David Lionheart, the founder of Play for Your Freedom, just was so passionate about this group. And I can't tell you all the late night phone calls he had with some of the vets, and even the care he had when we put the documentary up. We let them see it first because we didn't want to impact anyone negatively or re-traumatizing them. But even watching his patients through that and giving them a moment to watch it and really get their feelings out about how they felt about it and if there was anything they didn't want in the film anymore. But they all, were really excited that this might help other people. I think that was the amazing thing, is once we showed them, they were like, oh my God, other people are going to see this and know that this is real. And, if they're going through it, they might be able to say something sooner or get help sooner.
Yeah, I think you were kind of saying this in the beginning, but just talking about it removes a lot of the stigma that's there. And that's like a huge, relatively easy first step.
Well, yeah. And I think like normalizing some of this is helpful because, if people who maybe haven't dealt with people with mental health issues, it might be hard to understand. But if you have dealt with people with mental health issues and you understand the issue that they're exhibiting, often you can easily, make this situation not as significant as it feels to them. And there's things you can do by not interacting with them at the same level they're at, and kind of staying calm and being present with them, rubbing their back, talking to them, seeing where they're at. Because if you have a negative reaction to that, a lot of times that's met with something very powerful from them. And so if you do have the the good luck of having a steady mental health, which is incredible. I've met people like this. I don't know how they exist, but if you do have that ability, it's when you meet someone who's on the other side of that, meeting them with calm and consistency rather than coming back at them being like, why are you acting like that? You're being stupid, or you're acting a fool, instead being like, wow, you seem like you're really stressed out about this. What's making you so stressed out? Instead, talking to them at that level rather than meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, don't escalate it. It's not going to help anything.
Yeah. So I think I think that's something people need to remember, is that, if you do have someone who's struggling, sometimes their actions might not be of their own choosing. So it's to remember that that might not be who they are, and to try to figure out. And I'm not saying they're not people who are too tough in the world. I'm sure that exists, but I think most of us would rather have someone hug us when we're frustrated rather than meet us with that. So I think it's just remembering that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, Ash, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I don't want to eat up your whole afternoon, but if you want to, why don't you tell people where they can find it, and if you have like a website or socials or anything else you want to plug.
Yeah, thank you. So the main trailer you can find at playforyourfreedom.org, or you can type in PTSD, The Walking Wounded anywhere, and it comes up right away on YouTube. The film comes out October 1st on most major platforms. So if you have iTunes, Amazon Prime, Vudu, PlayStation, any of those, you'll be able to find it. The nice thing is we were working really closely with Play for Your Freedom. So if you do choose to buy the film, it does, obviously money goes to the distributor, but most of it comes back to Play for Your Freedom, which is really nice. So you're actually, just by watching something that is interesting to watch, you're actually giving to the guys and girls who Play for Your Freedom helps. So that's a really nice thing. So October 1st it comes out, but you can pre-order now. So if you want to help a little bit earlier, our iTunes pre-orders is what we really help get the film out as far as we can go. So if you do want to watch it and you can pre-order it, please do on iTunes.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time, and really appreciate you going through this and making a good, balanced documentary.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam, and thanks for having us on your show.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank Ash one more time, not just for coming on the show, but for taking the time out of her life to do this work and do the research and be the best definition of a journalist, which is a word that is sadly lacking in our world today. So huge thanks to Ash for everything she's doing for this. PTSD, The Walking Wounded is available now. It's not like a grim, depressing sit. It's informational. It's not happy-go-lucky, of course, but I really urge you to check it out and then to take some kind of action, any kind of action, even if it's just spreading the word to help these people who need it. We have a lot more interviews, a lot more new movie coverage, all that coming your way. You're not going to want to miss out, so please like and subscribe to the channel. I will have a review of PTSD, The Walking Wounded, but I wanted to get this interview out there as fast as possible because anything to spread the message is great. Also, make sure you listen to So Wizard Podcast every single week wherever you get your podcasts. SoWizardPodcast.com is your resource for reviews, recommendations, videos, merchandise, and more. So Wizard Podcast can also be found on Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month you get multiple monthly bonus shows. We love hearing feedback, so drop us a note in the comments, leave us something on social media. All the accounts can be found after the show and in the show notes. And on a more personal note, a good friend and I have an ongoing comedy comic series. It's called Social Studies. It's a slice of life, coming of age, comedy comic. We keep it light. We write it like a sitcom. It looks like a cartoon out of the 90s. We have a ton of fun doing it. We've been getting some awesome feedback. We do currently have a crowdfunding campaign. It's almost at the end right now, so it's a great time to jump on board at a cheap price. Otherwise, everything can be found at socialstudiescomic.com. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Thanks.